Welcome to this special edition of Ram Country. Since 2005, I've had the privilege of bringing you some of the great things that are happening all across the Springford Area School District. I've been retired for 7 years, and one of the great things about being retired is that you get to do all kinds of fun things. My wife and I have been doing some traveling, we've been enjoying our grandchildren, and we've also become beekeepers. Beekeeping is a very popular subject, and a lot of people are interested in bees and what's best for bees to keep them from becoming extinct. Bees are in trouble, and it's been a real challenge. Not only have we learned a lot as far as beekeeping is concerned, but we've had a bit of a challenge producing honey and keeping our hives surviving over the winter months. We're going to talk a little bit about beekeeping over the next 3 special shows, and we're going to talk to you a little bit about what it's like, what you have to do, what you need in order to become a beekeeper. The first thing that I would suggest is that you really get connected with your county organization. In Montgomery County, that is the Montgomery County Beekeepers of Pennsylvania, or Montgomery County, Pennsylvania Beekeepers Association. And their website can be found at www.montcopabees.org. We took a beginner's beekeeping class about 5 years or so before we retired. And we realized that beekeeping was just a little bit too much work for us to do while we were still employed. So we said, all right, let's wait until we're retired. We did so. And we took the beginner's beekeeping class again. A lot of information had changed in those 7 years that actually had transpired between the first time that we took the beginning class and when we took it a second time. I do have a shot of my wife and I encouraged her to trade in her wedding veil for a bee veil and be able to help in the bee yard. So this is a joint adventure that we do together and enjoy very much. The beginner's beekeeping class starts usually in January or February. It's held in Montgomery County at the 4-H Center over in Creamery. And they have a number of different instructors, folks that come in to tell you all about beekeeping. And it is, one of the most important things is developing those relationships between other beginning beekeepers and, more importantly, experienced beekeepers also. But the question is, why would anyone want to keep boxes of stinging insects, as many as 50 or 60,000 in each colony, in their own backyard? And of course, when I go out to elementary schools and talk about beekeeping, they know the answer to that. The kids do. The first reason, and I have a list for you here, is the honey. The honey is the most important part of beekeeping. And so far for us as beekeepers, that's just been a little elusive. We haven't collected too much honey. We've recycled most of the honey that our bees have made back into the hives. The bees do need a substantial amount of honey to get through the winter, as much as 50 pounds. Another reason why you would want to keep bees is to help the bees, and that's because of colony collapse disorder, or CCD. 44% of colonies collapsed in 2016, and that's an increase of about 1/3 over the last 10 years. So bees are in trouble, and we want to try to help them out in any way that we can. Keeping bees, it's also good for the environment. Did you know that honeybees are responsible for pollinating approximately 1/3 of all the foods we eat? Imagine going into your grocery store and seeing 1/3 less food available for you to purchase. Be pretty substantial. So bees play an important role in food production and also in our food supply. And the other reason is that beekeeping is good for the beekeeper. Scientists don't know exactly why, but beekeepers live longer. Perhaps it's being exposed to all the good things that are in the hive. The hive is just a treasure house of all kinds of good things, including the honey. We'll talk about that as we go through these presentations. Beekeepers live longer. So that's not why we actually decided to become beekeepers, but we're not going to say no to that as a benefit. The bees are in the news too. Wherever you look, you're going to see all kinds of articles about bees and what scientists are saying, or in this case, the EPA is defining as a bee killer. Could be herbicides, it could be insecticides. The bees are being threatened in a variety of different ways, and beekeeping has changed over the years. So what is a honeybee? Well, let's take a look. I have a shot here of 4 different insects. In the upper left-hand corner, you see a bumblebee, and in the lower-hand corner is a honeybee. Lower right-hand corner is a honeybee. Those are pollinators, and you can tell they're pollinators because their thorax, or the middle part of their body, is fuzzy. And I tell the kids at the elementary schools that fuzzy means friendly. So if you see an insect with a fuzzy thorax, you should not kill it. You should try to get it, leave it alone. And those animals, those insects are not aggressive. They can become defensive if they're defending their home or their hive, but they are not aggressive like the other 2 insects that are on your screen. The yellow jacket in the lower left-hand corner and the hornet in the upper right-hand corner are both in the wasp family. You can see the body parts are segmented more. All these insects on the screen are yellow and black, or like a deep orangish yellow. But you'll notice that the hornet and the yellow jacket don't have a fuzzy thorax. And so therefore they don't gather pollen and they don't pollinate flowers. Important part that the bumblebee and honeybee play. The other aspect of yellow jackets and hornets are that they are aggressive. And if you've ever stepped on a yellow jacket nest in the ground in your garden, I don't have to tell you that. They will come out in force and sting you. Hornets, you just have to walk too closely to their nest, and there's a good chance that they'll come out and sting you as well. Hornets and yellow jackets are also enemies of honeybees, and so beekeepers really don't like them too much. So let's take a look at who's who in a beehive. There are 3 main types of bees in a honeybee hive. First, you have the worker bee, which is the smallest, but it's also the most numerous as far as the population in the hive goes. As I mentioned earlier, there can be as many as 50 or 60,000 worker bees in a beehive at the height of the nectar flow, which would be in May and June. They are the smallest bee. The drone is next. Oh, and by the way, the worker bees are all females. The drone is the male counterpart, a little bit bigger, about a ½ centimeter bigger, and the drones do absolutely nothing to benefit the hive that they live in. My wife got me a shirt that said drone on it, and I thought maybe she was trying to communicate a message. I'm not sure. But the drones do serve a purpose. They go out and mate with queens from other hives, but as far as the hive in which they live, they don't do anything, but they do help to eat the honey. In fact, so much so that they serve no purpose that they get kicked out in the late fall, early winter. The worker bees kick them right out the front door and they freeze to death for the winter. The most important member of the colony or the hive is the queen. There is only one queen in every beehive. You can see she's about twice as big as a worker bee, and that queen is really important. The queen lays the eggs to produce all the workers that are needed to do all of the work in a beehive, and she can lay as many as 1,500, almost up to 2,000 eggs a day. She is attended to by the worker bees, and if she does her job, she can continue to do so for 3 to 5 years. I do have some pictures of some of our bees. The next shot is of some of our worker bees. Again, the most popular. So you're looking down into a hive, and we'll explain that a little bit later. Those are the tops of the frames that are in the white boxes that you see if you've ever looked at a beehive. The next picture is of one of the drones in our hive sitting on top of one of the frames. You can see compared to the worker bees, which are to the right, the drone is a little bit bigger. In this picture, I'm actually holding a drone in my hand. And the reason for that is because the drone can't sting me. Take a look at that. It is, you were very brave at first to do that, but you get to note which are the drones and which are the worker bees. And the next shot shows the queen. The queen is very easy to identify in this picture. because she is marked. She's marked with a dab of blue paint on her thorax, and that is how the queens are marked when we purchase a package of bees and install them. I have another shot of a queen. This one is marked with a yellow dab on its thorax. And if we look a little bit closer at the next picture, you can get an idea of just how big that queen is. And this queen is very healthy, and she is ready to lay eggs, which is her main function. If you look at the next picture, I wonder if you can spot the queen in this shot. Not easy to do. She is bigger and a little bit smoother. I'm going to show you. Okay, let's just take a look. We'll put a circle around the queen. And there it is, right there. So let's talk a little bit about the life cycle of a honeybee. I have some models to show you, as well as the diagram on your screen. And you can see that on day one, the queen lays an egg. And the egg, it remains an egg for 3 days. Eggs are very hard to see. They're rather small, and they are almost clear. So that makes them very difficult to see. On day 4, that egg hatches, and a larva is produced. The larva is then fed by other worker bees called nurse bees, and it's fed for a total of 6 days. So it's an egg for 3 days, a larva for 6 days, and then it becomes a pupa. The worker bees cover over the top of the cell with a mixture of pollen and wax. It has to be air permeable so that the pupa can breathe. And the worker bees manufacture this substance, and they cover it over for a total of 12 more days. And then, from that pupa, an adult bee emerges on day 22. So it takes 3 weeks for a bee to develop. You will never see baby bees in a hive. They emerge as full-grown adults. If you take a look at this model, you can see that the egg is laid in the cell. This is a cross-section of one of the cells. Again, it's almost clear. This is 10 times actual size, these models. The next thing I'll show you is the larva. This is what a larva looks like, also rather clear. And this is fed a special mixture of nectar that the worker bees produce. And then we have the pupa, and this pupa is about halfway developed. And then finally the adult bee. 2 sets of wings and 6 legs. All right. So let's talk a little bit about some of these other pictures here that we have. I have a shot next that will show you some eggs in a cell, what they actually look like. They're very, very tiny, as you can see. They're on the right side of the screen. On the left side of the screen would be larva, and the larva has just been fed that milky substance by the worker bees. And they swim around in that substance as they eat it. It's kind of like swimming around in a bowl of cereal, I think. The next picture shows one of our bees emerging. Was really excited to get this picture. It's about halfway out of the cell. When it's ready to emerge, it chews that cap off of the cell that's made out of pollen and wax, and then it squeezes itself out. Now, the next thing that's really important to know is that the bees serve all kinds of jobs in the hive. As soon as they emerge, within about 5 minutes, they go to work. And the first job that they have is they become a cleaner bee. And they begin cleaning the cell from which they emerged, as well as other cells. And you can see that there on the screen, days 22 to 24, they serve as cleaner bees. And then they serve as nurse bees. And that's when they feed the larva and take care of the larva, make sure that they're healthy. If for some reason an egg or larva is not developing properly, they remove it. And then you have builder bees. The abdomen of the bee, there are segments on the bottom of its abdomen that actually produce little scales of wax. And that wax is used to make the honeycomb, the wax comb that is in a hive. That comb is used to produce new brood, new young, and also to make honey as well as to collect pollen. And we'll talk more about that in just a little bit. After a bee works as a builder bee, it also serves as a guard bee. And the guard bees, just this week when I was working on the beehive, I was not working on the beehive, I was digging a hole in the bee yard to put a fence post in, and they were coming out and checking me. And you have to learn to not move quickly. You don't swat at bees, they're very cautious, very slow and deliberate in your movements. And the guard bees will leave you alone. If you move quickly, there's a good chance that you may get stung. They do their job. They don't want to sting you though, because of course that means they're going to make the ultimate sacrifice. They do die when they sting you. And then days 43 and onward, a bee becomes a forager, and they go out in search of nectar, in search of pollen sources, and they bring that back. When they bring it back, they also communicate to the other bees where that source is, and they do that by doing what's known as a waggle dance. Scientists have studied that dance, and they realize that the bee is communicating how far it is, how strong of a source it is, how good or how rich it is, and also what angle it is, the location, what angle it is from the sun. Bees have special eyes. They can see the sun even when it is cloudy. I would like you to take a look at a video clip right now of some bees bringing pollen into the hive. If you look very closely, you can see that it's on their rear legs. They have little baskets on their rear legs that get filled with get filled with pollen, and they bring that in. When they bring the nectar in, they're doing that using a special stomach that they have. Bees have two stomachs, one for their own body and one to transport nectar, and they bring that nectar in and deposit that in the cells. They then have to evaporate the moisture out of the nectar. It takes 7 gallons of nectar to make 1 gallon of honey. When the nectar reaches 17% moisture, it becomes honey, and they cap it with a wax cap. I do have a couple of still shots that I'd like to share with you of bees coming in carrying the carrying the pollen on their rear legs. The second shot, you can see the bee is making kind of a turn as it's approaching, and you can see both baskets on its hind legs are filled with pollen. The next shot is a microscopic shot of one of my bees. It shows what their hair looks like, a close-up of their hair. It really is kind of feather-like. And if you look at the next picture, you can see grains of pollen actually sticking to those fibers that are on the bee's hair. They comb that back using their legs back into those pollen baskets that are on their rear legs. The next picture shows a frame taken out of one of our beehives, and everything is going on this frame. It's just absolutely amazing. In the lower left-hand corner, you can see a bee with some bright yellow baskets of pollen on its legs. Most of the capped cells that are at the bottom of your screen, from the mid to the bottom of the screen, are brood, and that is brood waiting to hatch out, waiting to emerge into adult bees. There are a couple of cells off to the left of center, and those you can see have some larvae in them. The orangish cells, the orange-colored cells, are pollen, and that's pollen that the bees have brought back in. They might mix it with a little bit of nectar. They make something called bee bread, and they store it in those cells. In the upper left-hand corner, that is actually honey. Honey that has been made and capped with a wax cap. And the cells immediately below that arc of capped honey would be nectar that they are fanning, and they are making that into additional honey. And as that becomes honey, then they will cap that over as well. I do want to show you one more frame before we close for this session, and that is a still frame of a video that I took of the bees going in back and forth, bringing pollen and nectar back into the hive. The bee that you see in the upper right of your frame is carrying another bee. And if you look closely at that bee that she is carrying, I should say, you can see that the wings are a little tattered. That means it's an old bee. And in fact, it is a dead bee. The bee is actually an undertaker bee, one of the jobs of the cleaner bees, and that is to remove the dead bees. In the summertime, the worker bees only live 6 to 8 weeks. That's it. And that's why the queen has to be producing new workers all the time. So there you go. We talked a little bit about why you would want to raise honeybees, have those in your backyard, and the life cycle of the honeybee, as well as some of the jobs that the different worker bees do in the hive. The next time, we're going to talk a little bit about the history of beekeeping, and we're going to be talking about setting up a hive, choosing a location, and also installing a package of bees and just what that's like. So we hope that you join us for the next special edition of Ram Country when we continue our discussion of beekeeping. Thanks for joining us.